fresh nurses' strikes are on the horizon. On Friday, the Royal College of Nursing rejected the government's pay offer to its members and announced a further 48 hours of strike action over the May bank holiday. But that is unlikely to be the end of widespread industrial action by our nurses, and indeed, it could stretch on for months after RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen pledged to ballot members for a mandate to pursue further concessions from the government. Speaking to Laura Kuenssberg, Cullen was asked about the government's response.
You've had a letter from the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, just in the last half hour. You've called for urgent talks. What's his response to you been?
Well, it's interesting that it's taken the Health Secretary days to respond to my letter. And I get it half an hour before I'm coming on your programme. So I wonder why, first of all. And that's not about being disrespectful to me. It's been disrespectful to over 500,000 nurses that I represent.
What has he said, though?
In fact, it says very little, Laura. It actually says very little. He has spent longer writing in The Sun today than he has responding to our 500,000 nurses. And what does it say? It says that he believes the bonus that they have put on the table is enough, and nurses should accept that and continue to work in the high-risk areas that they're working with the understaffing that they've got.
And he's asking you to pause the strike action, though. Will you do that?
No. Our nurses will absolutely not do that. We've strike action for the end of this month, beginning of May, and then we will move immediately to ballot our members. And if that ballot is successful, it will mean further strike action right up until Christmas. Now, the person that can stop that, and the people that can stop that, is Steve Barclay and the ministers, and indeed the Prime Minister. And I would urge them again today that add to the money that they've put on the table, respect nursing, respect the health service, and let's get a resolution to this.
The nurses' action from 30th of April to 2nd of May will see a significant uptick in the seriousness of the strike. For the first time, nurses in emergency departments and cancer wards will also down tools. Cullen had this message for patients who might be affected.
The patients are getting a raw deal from this government, have done so for a long number of years, as have nurses, tens of thousands of vacant posts. But what I want to say to every patient that's listening this morning, the health service is in a crisis caused by this government, not our nurses. This government can't say on one hand, we value nurses so much that they shouldn't go on strike, and then we don't value them enough to pay them. And that's why we're in the crisis we're in. But nurses will not turn their backs on patients. When we are on strike at any time, we've had 6 days so far, nurses made sure at all times that patient safety was at the core of all decision making. We'll continue to do that. And should there be a major incident or a particular incident that nurses will have to deal with during a strike, they will return immediately, as they will have done from picket lines right throughout
But for anybody, I want to press you again on the specifics of taking a different kind of strike action, a more radical strike action where there won't be the same kind of protections that there have been before. Do you accept, by any reasonable logic, that this strike will put patients in more danger? It will create more risk for patients?
And I have to say back to you, Laura, patients are at risk every single day in this health service. Not just on days when nurses are taking strike action. They're taking strike action to highlight these risks. They are absolutely taking strike action to highlight the risks. And not every nurse will be not available for work on a day of strike. There'll be many, many nurses that don't belong to our union who will continue to work. It won't be that we'll find our hospitals with no nurses. And indeed, there'll be nurses like Greg who will not take strike action. And that is absolutely their right, and we'll respect that.
Later in the programme, another Greg was on, Conservative Party Chair Greg Hands, who is distinctly not a nurse, and he was asked how the government was going to fix the situation.
The point, I think, for our viewers watching this morning is what the government is going to do about it and what the consequences will be for the country. And if you look also at the consequences for the Prime Minister, for your boss, Rishi Sunak, one of his main promises is that he's going to get waiting lists down. Now, how on earth is that going to happen if you've got a series of strikes in the health service?
That is why Steve Barclay today has written to the RCN outlining...
saying very little is what Pat Cullen said.
Well, I disagree.
He's not agreeing to talk.
I've read the letter. Steve's door is always open. But we want to see what the other unions have to say, what the other people being balloted have to say about this very, very good offer. And I just stress again, £5,100 for a Band 5 nurse, £2,000 into their account by the summer. That is a very, very good offer.
But what has happened to waiting lists since Rishi Sunak made that pledge in January?
Well, obviously the strike action has not helped. We know that we're dealing with the waiting list problem as a result of the pandemic, which inevitably led to big delays in the NHS. We're getting to grips with that. The strikes haven't helped, but nonetheless, there's a real focus there. Steve Barclay, the Prime Minister, personally involved here in making sure that we do what we can to bring down those waiting lists.
Well,
but
if he's personally involved, it might not be making that much difference, because the waiting lists have got longer, actually. There's 7.2 million people on an NHS waiting list now in February. That is the highest level that it has ever been. Now, how on earth are you going to get to grips to that if there's a dispute with the nurses, there's a dispute also with the junior doctors? Don't you have to budge on the strikes if you are going to address that very real problem for members of the public?
But we have budged, because we have made this very, very good offer to all of the unions, to all of the 6 unions involved. Some are still balloting at the moment. Let's wait and hear their results. But it is a great offer, £5,100.
But the nurses don't think so, Greg Hans. I mean, our audience will hear you keep saying it's a fair offer, but they voted against it, as was their democratic right to do so as a union. You can agree with it, you can be frustrated with it. Of course, it's legitimate to say whatever you want about the result. But they voted no. And this is about the consequences. Okay. So again, I'll ask you, we have a record number of people on waiting lists, 7.2 million. How do you think you're going to fix that if industrial disputes are going on in the health service? Or actually, are you going to give up on that pledge?
We're definitely not giving up. We think it's unreasonable to take this strike action, particularly at a time when the other unions are balloting, particularly at a time when Unison, which represents a third of all the staff, accepted it by 74%. That is a big majority in favour of this very fair and reasonable offer.
As Hans said there, Unison voted to accept the government's deal, with 74% of its members opting in favour of it. However, Unite and GMB are still balloting their members, with results expected in about 2 weeks.
When the unions agreed to go into talks with the government with preconditions, and I think it's worth pointing out to people what those preconditions were. You know, Barclay turned around and he said to the health unions, there's no new money on the table. You have to suspend all strike action. We will talk about efficiencies and savings, and you have to recommend any deal we make here to your membership. What that did was it completely took any leverage away from those negotiations for all of the unions. So basically they went in there with nothing, begging. They'd gone from a position of strength and that strike wave growing to, we'll see what we can come out with. And what they came out with was a wholly inadequate deal, a lump sum, a bribe, a lump sum, and a 5% deal, which effectively does not face the main issues that we in nursing and certainly in the BMA are pushing, as well as pay, which is that our hospitals are unsafe and we can't deliver safe services, and you've seen all of these operations being cancelled on the waiting list. We have to get the train moving again. We have to get the momentum rolling, and that's what's been lost in this period. We've lost momentum over the strike wave, and it's like the grand old Duke of York, up, down, up, down. Actually, a lot of our people were demoralised. So for RCN members to reject their leadership, telling them to vote for this deal, was extraordinary, and it shows the depth of anger that there is on the wall today. They go against their leadership, Pat Cullen, telling us that this is a reasonable deal and it's the best we can get through negotiations. In Unite, I can tell you at the moment that it looks like the returns are telling us that this offer is going to be rejected. I can't speak for the GMB, and of course what's happened with Unison is that they have accepted this deal, which has now effectively split some of the health unions, and that's a real problem for us. We've got to learn major lessons for the way we negotiate. Our junior doctors, when they went in to see Barclay, were offered the same preconditions as the nurses, and they said, sorry for this, folks, they said, fuck off, make us an offer and we'll talk to you. And I think we need to be a little bit more doctory in that respect. Going forward, the RCN strikes are on. We need to make them as big, as massive, and as effective as possible. That needs to give confidence to the people that do want to fight, that do want to reject this deal, to keep pushing. Because what's at stake here, and I think, the people watching this need to understand this. What's at stake is not just paying our pockets. If this deal goes down, for nursing staff, it means a lot of us will just say, that's enough, we're off. And for the junior doctors, it's the hemorrhage will get worse, and we will not be able to recover to our pre-pandemic periods. We will not be able to get those people off the waiting lists and into the hospitals quickly. Those 500 people a week that are currently dying because they can't get into hospital services quickly enough, that will start increasing. And we will look at a two-tier system where people who can afford it will go private, and that's already happening. So we've got a lot to do. I think that we've had this period of demobilisation. We've got a remobilisation. We've got to equip ourselves. Now, the 1st and the 2nd of May is going to be a big day. Ask me another question on this. It's going to be a really big day for all of us.
Wow, with an invitation like that, Dave, I understand that your own branch of Unite, there's some news regarding the upcoming RCN strikes. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I can, and what I can say, and I'm really proud of this, is the staff, the union members of Unite, which is another major union inside the NHS, at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, voted to strike over pay. And what I can tell you now is our management have been given notice that when the nurses go out on strike on the 1st and 2nd of May, the 1,100 Unite members that work at Guy's and St Thomas's, which will include pharmacists, porters, food service assistants, IT technicians, as well as nurses, speech and language therapists, will be joining them on the picket line. What I can also tell you is that we'll be calling a major demonstration from the St Thomas's site on the 1st of May, on May Day. And we will be also seeking to link up with the BMA and the NEU and anyone else in the public sector that wants to fight against the Tories. And we hope that strike and the way we intend to conduct that strike at Guy's and St Thomas's lays down a marker to all of those workers and those Unison members that perhaps saw that their union wasn't prepared to fight. We are prepared to fight. The workers at Guy's and St Thomas's, be they nurses, be they doctors, be they every other grade of staff now, are prepared to fight over pay. And more importantly, we're prepared to fight over the future of the NHS. So that invitation on the 1st of May isn't just to trade unions that are in dispute. It's to every single community cuts group, every single group that wants to fight back, every single person in London that wants to say, we believe in the NHS, we believe it's the workers in the NHS that will defend the NHS. We want them outside our hospital at midday on the 1st of May. And we want to say to the Tories, fair and reasonable, that offer is not fair and reasonable. The NHS is not safe in your hands. Pay up or get out.
I think that is fantastic news and resistance. I've got another question for you. In light of Unison's capitulation, let's call it, do you think that members might be persuaded to leave Unison for other unions that would be taking more militant action? I mean militant in the most complimentary fashion possible.
I think that what we've always seen is whenever unions fight, people join the unions that are fighting, and we're already seeing that inside Tommy's and inside, all the unions that fight. When the RCN won their strike ballots, they went from 350,000 members to 500,000 members. 500,000 nurses are now in the RCN, and I think that two things in unison. I think that their leadership has let them down in health. I think it is a touch of the lions led by donkeys. But I would also want to say this, there are some fantastic people working inside Unison that do not like this pay deal and did not want to accept this pay deal. They've been let down by leadership that really hasn't mobilised their strengths and their members inside the union. If those people decide they want to join a union that is fighting, we're not going to stop them. What we want to do is we want to get a decent pay settlement and we want to defend the NHS. And as Malcolm X said, by any means necessary.
Also appearing on Koonsberg this weekend was Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting. He had some tough words for the government, but he didn't seem that keen on the nurses either, criticising them for planning to withhold their labour again. That's why Koonsberg asked him this.
You said that the nurses' original ask of 19% was unaffordable. Would 10% be affordable?
Well, I think what we need is a workforce plan. The government have promised a workforce plan because, as I've said before, we've got to see these strikes in the context of retention of NHS staff. And I think the even bigger risk isn't just that people walk out for more days of industrial action, is they walk out of the NHS altogether. And when you compare pay rates in the NHS to other sectors, including retail, when you compare social care pay rates, there's a degree of uncompetitiveness now. So people are walking out, as well as going to other countries.
So would you offer 10%?
As with Pat Cullen, I'm not going to sit here on your programme and pluck numbers out of the air and negotiate on air.
But that's not plucking numbers out of the air. I mean, our viewers want to get an idea of how Labour would handle it differently. You say very strongly the government's made a mess of it. So how would you fix it? Would 10% be affordable in your view?
Well, I wouldn't expect the Health Secretary to make commitments on air now. What I would expect him to do is sit around the table and negotiate, and that's what a Labour government would do.
But you've said to us previously that 19% was unaffordable. You've said that 35% for the junior doctors was unaffordable. So you are happy sometimes to talk about numbers. So I'll ask you again, is 10% affordable?
Well, we'll set out our manifesto policies, which will be fully costed and fully funded
this is a situation right here, right now.
General election. I know, Laura, and that's why the Health Secretary should be here, but he isn't. And frankly, I'm fed up of coming on programmes and being asked how I, a Labour spokesperson, would fix Conservative problems tomorrow as if I'm in government tomorrow. I'm not in government tomorrow. The Conservatives are.
Fiery. I don't know about you, but I think knowing exactly how much a likely Labour Health Secretary values one of the most important workforces in the NHS is pretty important. But I'm sorry to hear you're sick of doing your job, Wes. We've all been there. Dave, what did you make of Wes Streeting's response?
I just cannot get my head round these politicians, especially from Labour at the moment, being unable to actually nail the reality of what's going on in the NHS. I mean, they have a lot of liaison with trade unions about what's happening in the NHS front line. We've got 7.2 million people on the waiting lists now. 3 million people over 18 weeks and 379,000 people waiting for over 2 years for surgery. That shows the extent that the crisis in the NHS is affecting patients. There was a King's Fund report recently that said the prolonged funding squeeze between 2008 and 18, combined with years of poor workforce planning, weak policy and fragmented responsibilities meant that staff shortages have become endemic in the NHS, to the point that the workforce crisis will be the key limiting factor on efforts to boost NHS activity and tackle the rising backlog of care. That was before COVID. Now, we have got 48,000 vacancies of nurses in the NHS, and I think something like 30,000 plus vacancies of junior doctors in the NHS. Do some Richie maths, Wes. If we can't plug that workforce gap and restore pay rates to what they were before the austerity started biting, we're never going to fix the NHS. I can't see how they fail to see that. And I just find a lot of these politicians have got to stop being as slippery as they are. There is a crisis in the NHS. People are dying waiting to get into NHS services. You know, people are flooding out of the NHS, nurses, doctors and other staff, because they just cannot work in these conditions anymore. It would be a tap-in for Wes Streeting to say, yes, we have to give restorative pay rises to these groups of workers. We're going to tax the rich to pay for it. It won't, affect inflation, and there you go. They'd be rolling a coach and horses over the Tories on their way into 10 Downing Street. If they did that, they just cannot see that.